Welcome to the Blood Red channel, 9 years on from Jordan Henderson signing for Liverpool Football Club. I'm Guy Clarke, alongside me, Matt Addison, as we get ready this afternoon to chat all about the Red skipper, the influence he's had at Anfield, and of course, the mantle he had to take on from arguably the club's greatest ever player. Matt, thanks for joining me. And as I say, we're going to spend sort of the next 15 minutes or so talking about Jordan Henderson and just what a brilliant captain he's ended up becoming for the Reds.
Yeah, it's been quite the journey, hasn't it, for Jordan Henderson? Obviously 9 years to the day, as you say, and there's certainly been some ups and some very big downs as well. There's been so many sort of different parts to his story at Liverpool, and I think there's a few players who really this season have stood out, but certainly he has been one of them, and for the last couple of seasons in particular, I think he's been one of the best midfielders in the Premier League for sure.
Yeah, and it's sort of crazy to think that, I suppose, even coming into this season, the doubts from some quarters still there over Jordan Henderson, whether or not he was going to quite fit into Klopp's system initially, whether he could do it, whether he technically was a good enough player. Yet this year, when football was suspended, and now we're in June waiting for the football to return, the overwhelming cries for PFA Player of the Season point towards Henderson himself.
Yeah, I think part of the PFA thing is that narrative and that story of how he's come back and maybe surprised a few people. I don't think anybody is going to claim that he's a better footballer than one like Mohamed Salah or Kevin De Bruyne, but it is about that, as you say, the sort of perception. And I think, okay, when he came in, he wasn't perfect straight away, but he was only young. I think he was only 20 when he first arrived. It was obviously a big step to go from Sunderland, where he'd grown up and come through the system, to then come to Liverpool and play for a club as big as that. I think is incredibly difficult. And as you say, even as far as even after he'd won the Champions League, maybe going into this season, there was sort of doubts over whether he would be in Liverpool's best 11 when you've got Fabinho fit. Maybe Naby Keita could have been at his peak at the start of this season, potentially. There were questions to be asked, and I think that does stem back to people have this sort of idea in their mind of what Jordan Henderson is like as a footballer, maybe from even as long ago as maybe 6-7 years ago. They still think of him in the same way, and it isn't really fair, because he's developed so much, he's improved so much, and he's the captain of Liverpool Football Club now for a very good reason, and that's because he's the best person for the job. I think Liverpool are full of leaders. They've got obviously people like Milner, who are very experienced. They've got people like Virgil van Dijk, who even when he first came in, there were calls for Van Dijk to take the captaincy off Jordan Henderson. But Jordan Henderson is captain for a reason, and Jurgen Klopp is obviously one of the best managers in the world, and he rates him that highly that he's always going to be in his team when he's fit and when he's firing, and he's always going to be his captain because he's the best person for the job. And I think you only have to sort of see what the rest of the squad say about Jordan Henderson and the sort of feelings about him. He is absolutely the ideal man for the job. And, okay, when he first took over that captaincy from Steven Gerrard, he wasn't quite perfect for the job, but nobody was going to be. It's one that you have to grow into, and certainly I think he has grown into it.
Yeah, he's had plenty of criticism, and obviously this season, I think in particular, as you allude to, plenty of praise as well. And I think Klopp probably summed it up best. Even I think it was back in January when, after a game, he basically said, if anybody who's with us can't sort of appreciate how good Jordan Henderson is, well, I can't help you. And that really does sort of just underline that the manager really does have him in such high esteem. And talking of winning the Champions League last year, and that really does seem to have taken Liverpool as a club onto the next level. And the manager spoke so much about the Barcelona game, even pre-match against Hotspur, that having the natives, James Milner and Jordan Henderson, in the dressing room was so crucial to actually being able to help take Liverpool onto that next step.
Yeah, definitely. I think, it's easy to sort of talk about his captaincy and his leadership and that sort of thing, but it's also the fact that he's developed so much as a footballer as well. I mean, against Barcelona and teams like that last season, and even Atletico Madrid, even though Liverpool lost this season, he didn't look out of his depth or out of place in those matches. And when you consider some of the midfielders he was coming up against, particularly in that Barcelona game, I mean, there's some absolutely world-class players there, and he was one of the best players on the pitch, if the best. So you have to sort of take the leadership as one strand of it, but also his quality as a player as well. I think that quality has always been there, and sometimes maybe even just him being English and maybe him not being a fancy foreign name that came in for huge money, maybe that has been held against him at times. I think maybe, look, you don't want to quote Sam Allardyce too often, but I know he's sort of said, but if he was called Sam Allardyce, he might be viewed in a slightly different way. And I think that there is an element of truth in that. I think Jordan Henderson, maybe if he'd have been signed from, I don't know, from Sao Paulo instead of Sunderland, maybe he would have been viewed in a slightly different way. So yeah, I think obviously what he's done to drive this team forward over the last couple of years, he's as much a part of that as anybody else.
Yeah, I think that might be the first reference on the agenda to Sam Allardyce, and probably the first ever reference of Sam Allardyce and Sao Paulo in the same sentence. But in terms of Henderson, the player, I think as a captain, certainly, as you said before, he's really grown into that role, and I don't know, maybe it's a captain than he is player, but that's probably an unfair thing to say in itself. As you were saying there, like his technical prowess as a player often sort of goes underlooked, doesn't it? I suppose this year with that long diagonal pass that we've seen so many times has really sort of underlined that.
Yeah, some of his passing is exceptional, as you say, whether it's short or long, he always gets it spot on. And just the fact that he can dictate the tempo of a game as well. I think maybe earlier on in Liverpool career, he was a bit more of a box-to-box player and a bit more sort of all action and energy and just running about the place. And, he obviously had a role in the team then. It wasn't his job at that time to dictate the play and do that sort of thing, because you had sort of Steven Gerrard doing that instead. So, his role has evolved into something where he is a bit more refined now. And I think he is a better passer of the ball than people give him credit for. I think he's better technically, as you say, than, a lot of midfielders in the Premier League who maybe get more praise than he does. And you only have to think about sort of the comments that Sir Alex Ferguson made about the way his run and his gait was wrong, and he'd come into problems and things like that. I think when someone as big and as influential as Ferguson comes out and says something like that, I think those comments do stick, and I think that held him back for a little bit. Obviously, that's more of a physical thing than a technical thing, but I think they sort of go hand in hand in the way that he was sort of typecasted as a certain type of player. And maybe he was that at one stage, but even when you evolve, those sort of stereotypes do still stick. So I think he's obviously found it hard. He's had a lot of adversity to overcome, but I think anybody, as you say, you've not made those comments to say that if anybody doesn't value Jordan Henderson as a captain and as a player now, then you really can't help them, because he is one of the best midfielders in the world. And I think Liverpool certainly are starting to recognise that now. But I think, slowly but surely, the rest of the country and the rest of Europe can see that too.
And he obviously had the job of taking the armband on from Steven Gerrard, was sort of, I suppose, soft introduced into the role in Brendan Rodgers' final season as Steven Gerrard was obviously on his way out. And that was, I suppose, somewhat of a bit of a breakthrough season for Henderson. Of course, the back end of the 13-14 campaign, if he hadn't suspended, Liverpool might have won the title that year. But as everything was crumbling around him, I suppose early hallmarks of what a leader he could become, that actually even in that difficult season, Suarez had gone, he did seem to be the guy trying to galvanize and pick the squad up.
Yeah, I think he's always sort of had that leadership about him. Even, when he was a young player, he might not have been the most vocal or the most outspoken in the dressing room. And as you say, when you're in there with Suarez, with Gerrard, it is difficult for a young player to sort of stand up and maybe make himself heard and be vocal. But he always led by example. He was always a player that, you would hear would stay behind and do extra training sessions. He was always, very fit and a very physical player. And as you say, he's sort of grown into that role and taken on more and more responsibility. And I think, if you asked any of the young players now coming through the system, whether they're just starting to train at Melwood, say Harvey Elliott or someone like that, I'm sure, all of those players would say someone like James Milner, Jordan Henderson, that sort of group of leaders that Liverpool have, they're very open, they're very sort of honest with them, and they'll guide them through and help them through that. And I think that probably comes from what Jordan Henderson had when he was coming through and he was a young player. And okay, he was sort of brought to the club rather than coming through Liverpool's academy. But it's the same sort of thing where he came into a dressing room which had world-class players, which had big characters and that sort of thing. And he sort of needed a bit of help. And now he can sort of take on the reverse role, if you like, and try and help those players come through. So, yeah, I think obviously you say that the season that he sort of found his feet a little bit, I think 13-14, he was Liverpool's best players. Obviously then gets sent off near the end. And, obviously it's referenced a lot that, maybe it could have been different those last few games that, if he hadn't got himself sent off and suspended, maybe things would have been different. We'll never know. But I think certainly that just underlines how good he was that season. He then obviously has had a few different injury troubles and things like that. He's had different adversities in his position. Has obviously changed. He went from a box-to-box player. Then I think primarily because of the injuries, they had to change the way that he played his tactical sort of role in the side. He then goes and becomes a number 6, which he always wasn't his favourite thing. It wasn't something that he wanted to do. And now he's back to being a number 8 again because of Fabinho coming in. So, yeah, the sort of example that he sets, the leadership, the role that he had in the squad, and that role on the pitch as well, it's always grown, it's always evolved. But I think it's come to a point now where he's in a perfect position that he's played in a couple of different positions on the pitch. He knows the role inside out. He knows, he can be versatile and do different things. But he's also, the perfect captain, if you like, in that he's done all of those jobs. He's been in all of the positions of everyone else on that football pitch. So, yeah, he's just the perfect captain, isn't he, really?
And you're saying being the perfect captain, of course, taking the armband on from Steven Gerrard. And, of course, he's not a local lad like Steven Gerrard and Jamie Carragher, of course, long-time vice-captain previously for Liverpool. But having arrived at the club just a few days shy of his 21st birthday, as you say, 20 years of age, he seems to have grown up. He understands the ethos, the ideals of Liverpool Football Club. And one thing that I always sort of really think shows that he has come through that system and training with the players like Steven Gerrard is how many former players always talk about Steven Gerrard when they first arrive at Liverpool, wrapping a pass in. And if you've got that touch from the get-go, you'll get the respect from Henderson. You see that almost on the pitch on a weekly basis. But he's constantly saying the standards at Liverpool Football Club have to be the highest in the league, and we won't accept anything but.
Yeah, I think that was almost an underrated quality, really, from someone like Steven Gerrard. That, obviously he was a fantastic player and he had so much ability himself, but it was the way that he elevated the standards of everyone else around him. And I think that's possibly the highest praise that you can give Jordan Henderson, is that, okay, he was never going to be Steven Gerrard as a footballer. That was pretty much impossible for that to be the case. But he's got those traits where he does make everybody else around him better. And I think that Barcelona game last season is a pretty good example. Right from the get-go, he was one of those who was demanding the ball. I think that first goal comes because it's Henderson who drives into the box and takes the shot, which is saved, and Origi pokes in the rebound. So it's there every single game. It doesn't matter who Liverpool play, whether it's home, whether it's away. He's always one that is on the ball early. He'll passes out to the fullbacks, and quite often, obviously, Trent Alexander-Arnold and Andy Robertson is where that creativity comes from. But I think as much as it's them being in the right position to put those crosses into the box, it's also Jordan Henderson, his role to get that ball, to get it out to them quickly. And he does that time and time again. And it's always a crisp pass, as you say. It's always done with purpose. It feels like he knows exactly the role that he has to do, and he just does that absolutely expertly. So, yeah, it's one of those where, whether it's at Anfield, whether it's on the training pitch, he will always give 100%. I think he'll then inspire some of the other top players to do the same, and that filters down, as you say. I mentioned the young players. I'm sure someone like Harvey Elliott is inspired every single day to go into training, give 100%, because he can see that Jordan Henderson was at one stage his age. He's grown up and is now a Champions League winning captain, soon to be a Premier League winning captain too. And yeah, I think Jordan Henderson, more than anyone, has had to earn that respect. But I think the fact that he's had to earn it and strive for it for so long sort of just makes it even more valuable. Now he's got that. Everyone knows that he's got it because he deserves it and because of that way that he's progressed and earned it throughout his career.
As you say, European Cup winning captain, just the fifth in Liverpool's history, of course, behind Emlyn Hughes, Phil Thompson, Graham Souness, and of course his predecessor, Steven Gerrard. He will be the first Liverpool captain to lift the Premier League title. So that poses the question then, before we go, looking to the future, he's just shy of his 30th birthday, Jordan Henderson. The other four names I mentioned before, all legendary figures at Liverpool Football Club. Are we already in the sort of realms of him being a legendary figure, or is there still, I suppose, work to solidify and sort of make that concrete that Jordan Henderson will forever, of course, be synonymous with Liverpool Football Club?
Yeah, I think as soon as you become the first Liverpool captain to lift the Premier League trophy, first league title in 30 years, I think automatically, not just Jordan Henderson, but I think everyone in this current squad is going to go down and be remembered by Liverpool fans for a long time to come. But I think, obviously, when Liverpool do lift this trophy, it's going to be him who's front and centre. It's going to be him, quite rightly, who gets to lift that trophy. And it's unfortunate, of course, that there's no fans inside the stadium to celebrate that moment with. But, you know, when we look back on Liverpool's first Premier League trophy in 30, 40 years' time, it's going to be him who's front and centre of all these photographs. It's going to be him who, you know, when people look back, it's going to be Jordan Henderson's Liverpool that won this title. And, you know, the fact that it is him sort of takes away a little bit, if you like, from some of the other players who've made a huge contribution this season. But, you know, that's just the way it is. I think certainly he's been a huge player for Liverpool this season. And if he does end up winning the PFA Player of the Year award, then I think that would be certainly deserved. But it would also just add to that it would be very much not just Liverpool winning this Premier League trophy, but Jordan Henderson as well. And for somebody who, as you say, has had to almost step out of the shadow of Steven Gerrard during his time at Liverpool, I think for him to do that is just an extra achievement in itself, because whoever followed Steven Gerrard, whether it was Jordan Henderson, whether it was somebody else entirely, it was the most difficult job in the world. And the fact that he's now won the Champions League and will win the Premier League, I think, you know, nobody can argue with the fact that he has not just succeeded that, but exceeded everybody's expectations. Because when Jurgen Klopp first arrived at the club, if you'd have said, you know, they'll win the Champions League the following year, they'll win the league, everybody would have took that 100%.
Yes, certainly. And he, as you say, has led every step of the way and led by example in doing so. Well, that's it from us here on the agenda on the Blood Red channel. If you're joining us on YouTube, do remember to like, comment and share wherever you can do. Your support is always much appreciated, as it is to those listening wherever you get your audio on demand. If you could leave us a rating and review, that too is always more than appreciated. From myself, Guy Clarke and Matt Addison, thanks for your time and your company. Until next time here on Blood Red, it's bye for now.